Yes, quiet down now, everyone. Good. Now that we're all quieted down, I would like to thank the college for allowing me to speak at such a prestigious establishment. This is truly a great privilege and an honor for myself, and I will never forget this experience. That aside, the topic of this lecture is one that not only is rather obscure, but almost taboo in some places. The topic, of course, being the end of our world. Now, while I've written quite frequently in my many letters and research papers on the beginning of the world, most specifically with the primordials and the creation of Mundus, one thing that even I tend to pass up is how the story of Mundus, and all of us, has been prophesized and written in times past to end. A story that even now is being written, but one that the Elder Scrolls have foretold long ago, and a story that has been told time and time again. As I've said quite a lot in my research, in the beginning there were two ancient primordials, Anu and Padme, otherwise known by their newer incarnation names as Anuiel and Sithis. These two are responsible for much of the things that would form us, and even more so the things that would result in the gods who ruled over Mundus for generations. But with every beginning there is also an end, one foretold by various cultures throughout Tamriel, and one that almost seems to mirror the same sentiment, themes, and occurrences as those before it. With that said then, it would perhaps be best to start diving into these cultures and their interpretations of the end of our world, and potentially its cyclical rebirth. Starting, of course, with one whose story stems from the very province we stand in right now. The story of Alduin and his return. It's written in the rather famous Songs of the Dragonborn, a collection of prophetic poems written by ancient Nords in the dragon language of Dovazul.
Akvin kalost proda, dovedvin kofin kra, torfod sema, vinkain metsfundain, Alduin, fendoljun, kutzik fokun stadnau, forthandala kva, divon finlein.
Or, in our more common language,
And the scrolls have foretold of black wings in the cold, that when brothers wage war come unfurled. Alduin, bane of kings, ancient shadow unbound, with a hunger to swallow the world.
all of which is rather foreboding and a rather ominous series of prophecies that, strangely enough, align with occurrences in our own world. What with the start of the rebellion and all. But it's what's written before and after that line of brothers waging war that is where we should look when discussing the topic of the end times. Specifically, the concept surrounding the existence of this Nordic deity known as Alduin. Now, this Alduin seems, to many Nords at least, to be the same god as the god of time himself, Akatosh. But for some reason, many imperial scholars have gone to say that it is but a simple Nordic tale that has perverted the legacy of said dragon god. On the other hand, I have found that, contrary to those variation points and arguments made by my contemporaries, Alduin seems to be almost an equivalent to what the primordials had done in their incarnation. To say this, Alduin seems to be the future version of Akatosh. I know this seems a bit far-fetched at first, but I assure you this viewpoint has its merits. Keenly in that Alduin is seen in the Nordic pantheon as the deity that will bring about the end of times, said to consume the world, hence giving him the title of World Eater. To that end then, connecting Alduin and Akatosh makes a lot of sense. Not only do the two take the form of dragons, but both are considered by the Nords as the same god, or at least two halves of the same septum. So perhaps then it is true that Alduin is a form of Akatosh, that shall appear when the day of reckoning approaches, swallowing up existence and leaving nothing in his stead. Only for it to begin again, once the death of Alduin and the birth of his next incarnation begins again in the next Kalpa. For the Nords, this tale is one wrapped in quite a lot of mythology, especially that concerning a mystical hero known as the Dragonborn, that at some point will appear and take on Alduin and stop him so that he may not fulfill his prophecy. Although as to whether this may prevent the Kalpic cycle and hence the next world from beginning, is truly something that we will only find out if it happens. And let's be real, these are mythologies. With the Nordic legends of how the world shall end out of the way, the most prominent one is that of our neighbours to the southwest, the Red Guard. The Red Guard, however, claim to be far different from the other races of Tamriel, as their own history and legends tell of an isle known as Yokudan, a far-off land that had apparently been sank through some strange and almost magical means. But where the story of the Red Guard differ from others is exactly in the sinking of their homeland. Many Red Guard believed that the only reason they survived the sinking was because of Ruptka, the yokudan equivalent of Akatosh more or less. He had pulled them out at the last moment from their Kalpa and transplanted them into ours. The story lends itself some credit when it comes to using Ruptka, especially with his connections to time, but at the same time almost seems to destroy said credit when a closer look is taken at actual geography of Tamriel over the past few eras. Most keenly in how a few of the remaining isles of Yokudan exist in some Tamrielic maps. Although it is entirely possible that due to the turmoil of the Second Era, various mistakes were made concerning said geography. But that said, I seem to have gotten off track. For you see, the reason I bring up this so-called Kalpic jump that the Red Guards had taken comes down to how they seem to have seen the world supposedly ending, and how with a jump from one Kalpa to another it may have changed that end altogether, as the Red Guard originally believed that the world comes to an end, and the next Kalpa begins, only as an escape from a never-ending hunger of Satakal, a fusion of the two primordials that had originally been created by Ruptka. So looking at this jump that they claim to have been a part of, the prophecy gets thrown out of order, and new events subsequently rise due to changes in what the Red Guard believe to have been a cyclical process. Although that being said, the cycle had already been supposedly changed once, due to the transgressions of Sep, something we'd akin to Lorcan, in their tales of creation that they have, with some of them even believing the sinking of Yokudan being the doing of Sep. With that, however, it seems that, continuing in the recollection of Tamrielic cultural apocalypses is not the best way to explore the many ways that those before us have predicted the world to end. And as a way to break away from an almost convening story of the world being swallowed by some god, I'd like to bring into the fold of work of one of my colleagues, recently found on her expedition to Blackmarsh, a work that we've aptly named Lost Tales of the Famed Explorer. In these fragments of writing we found scattered around the regions of Murkmire, the writer writes of a rather profound and lucid experience, which the character in said writing experiences, with the whole tale of these pages being almost normal until some point until the work that we begin to get a very different and very much argonian look at the world, how it may end, the afterlife, and what the author describes as other worlds. One rather important quote that I feel has quite a bit of bearing on the topic at hand today goes as such.
He looked up and saw other worlds and other towers. They were spinning wheels and they crashed into each other, and their spokes got tangled up and they broke each other. And he saw that his world was breaking too, but quick as a snake, a shadow came and swallowed up the roots of the tower so that they would not break.
Here we see the author clearly describing our old friend, the mysterious black being consumed by hunger, swallowing up the world, which here is described as a tower, with the other wheels most likely being references to the monomyth and other various terms used to refer to the Kalpa's previous, soon to come, and current worlds. That said then, this of course seems to be a much more derivative work than the ancient legends that I've been talking to up until this point, as many of its key details seem to be pulled straight from places like the ancient Nordic legends and sayings of the members of the tribunal. Nonetheless, this work is perhaps the best way of summarizing all that we've come to know of how the world may end, based on what our predecessors have prophesied. That is, that almost everyone seemingly agrees that some sort of deity or obscenely powerful being swallowing up the world, leaving only chaos in their stead, and perhaps at the same time, a place for that chaos to end and be brought back to order to create the world after ours. I think with that last bit, I've almost gone over all the time I have here with my guest lecture on the end of the world of Tamriel. I'm sure that many of you have classes to attend or work to do, so once again I would like to thank the college and its faculty for letting me present my work here, and perhaps in the future to do so again, once my colleagues and I have discovered more on various metaphysical aspects of Tamriel, of course.
Really? That seems hard to believe. You're sure about that?
I've been told by many in the past that I talk too much, old boy. But it seems that my talking has finally found its way to someone who needs me.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Little beat, tight beat. Hey, I got fast travel. Looks like I'm going places. Tell Bonnie I just heard I'm always levitating. You wanna be a bitch? Hey, do yourself a favor. Look the other way. Stay in my good graces. I can sit to your wife, sit to your brother too. King of the underworld, my lad Balmora Blue. You try to fight back, I expected more of you. King of the underworld, my lad Balmora Blue. Welcome to Jib's fair, my honored carousel. You say yeah, this is magical, you don't know how to spell. You're the sickest past, cause you're leaving on me. But I'm Lucy and Luchas, I'm retrieving on it. I can sit to your wife, sit to your brother too. King of the underworld.